This is pretty easy. I'm going to say no. You're going to say yes, he can't afford it.
Welcome to On Deadline, the Washington Examiner's political game show. I'm Tianelo Desher.
And I'm Christian Daytalk.
Each week we discuss the latest breaking and biggest news. We give our opinions, and you get to vote in the comments with whom you agree more. Don't forget to add those comments, like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. We begin this week above the fold for the most important story, which is, Christian, I want to know, is the government going to shut down? So the House is not scheduled to come back until Wednesday, but if the Senate doesn't pass any more government funding, the federal government shuts down after midnight on Tuesday. Is this up to House Democrats or is this up to Senate Democrats? Will the House come back and have to bail out the Senate? What's going on here?
Well, you laid that all out perfectly, Tiana. We have this Tuesday at midnight deadline for Congress to come together and keep the government operational. Now, there's a lot of moving parts. The House, they have passed, their appropriations bills, and if Senate Democrats, they can't come to an agreement in these last few hours, they are proposing a continuing resolution which maintains the current funding levels, which, let's not forget, were the Biden-era funding levels approved, ahead of FY 2025. Otherwise, we're going to see huge swaths of the government, be furloughed, essentially. More than probably 800,000 federal employees will, be out of work. They will receive back pay. But this is big, and the White House is trying to spin this as being the Democrats' fault. But I kind of think the Democrats are actually, for the first time under Trump, doing their job. And when I say doing their job, I'm not saying they are funding the government or they're advancing legislation to help their constituents. In fact, a shutdown might hurt some of their constituents. But what they are doing is finding a way to effectively stand up to Donald Trump and to this administration. We've heard about how they want to extend these premium tax exemptions, tax write-offs for ACA, which will expire at the end of the year. But I think this isn't actually about the language that they're using. This is all about being a roadblock to Donald Trump. And we've seen it over the last week. Some of the threats that are coming out of the White House when it comes to, WIC benefits, will be disrupted. SNAP will be disrupted. They're speaking in the language of the Democrats. And it's just not enough because ultimately there are other things that the Democrats are worried about, namely Trump acting beyond the powers of the presidency or his ICE agenda or the tariffs or anything like that. And they're saying this is the stand because historically we know the party in power, specifically when it's a Republican in the White House and Republicans holding majorities in Congress, they will take the blame for this heading into the November elections next year. And this is, the biggest win Democrats can hang their hat on because let's be honest, they have not been effective when it comes to, being a roadblock for Donald Trump, implementing every part of his agenda that he sees fit. And I think they won't bend, and therefore we probably will see a shutdown starting Wednesday.
So I agree that politically this will probably backfire on Trump, right? Mm-hmm. The last government shutdown we had, which actually was more modest than the one that we will have if the government indeed does shut down, was in 2018. And it on the margins harmed Trump. It wasn't the game changer. But this year you have the Virginia gubernatorial election coming up. And
correct.
Republicans have really been hammered in the polls because you had DOJ and a lot of Northern Virginia workers who were federal employees losing their jobs or taking the buyouts or whatnot. I want to talk about the concept of resistance to Trump. I am in favor of a valid, viable opposition party that poses a credible check to the party in power, even if the party in power is the party that I am, more aligned with.
It strengthens the two-party system.
But my bone to pick with Democrats is that they are going after something that is not only not registering in the polls as important, because screw the polls, but is something that was passed in regular form of governance. Mm-hmm. So the nut of what they care about is, the Medicaid reform and the cuts to the Affordable Care Act subsidies passed under One Big Beautiful Bill. One Big Beautiful Bill, like it or hate it, was passed through normal order. It was passed in the House, passed in the Senate, signed by the president. There was no reforms to how the filibuster was made, even the way it was budgeted. They did not change the budgetary rules, right? that is part of democracy working, even if you don't like it. The same way that American Rescue Plan, which I thought lit the economy on fire by spending an extra $2 trillion, that was still passed the regular order. If you were going to make the argument that Trump is an existential threat 10 years on, which I don't think anyone believes, but specifically on the basis that he is, playing with fascism, I think that's obviously way overblown. No kings, unprecedented usurpation of power. Why would congressional Democrats not want to go after the actual obvious ways Trump has usurped Congress's constitutionally delegated authority? So one would be maybe the TikTok ban, where Congress passed the TikTok ban, Joe Biden signed it into law. It allowed Trump to extend the ban once. He's done so now 4 times or so?
4 times, and, essentially signed an executive order last week for staying it indefinitely as they ink, the final deal.
So that is clearly Trump defying the Constitution's guidance that the executive branch executes the law that Congress passes.
Yeah.
But the most direct way in which they've just stolen Trump specifically, not Joe Biden. You can't say Obama did it first. You can't say Hillary wanted to do it. The way that Trump personally has usurped Congress's power is in imposing the tariffs. The Constitution reserves the right to impose, import duties and taxes to Congress. And he's doing it on his own. And I know they're just hoping that SCOTUS comes in to save their butts. But if you're making the argument that Trump is acting like a king, that is the closest one. And so it just, from a political perspective, it makes Democrats just seem so fundamentally unserious if they're saying this country is in grave danger. We have, a wannabe fascist dictator, orange Hitler, Cheeto, Nazi. But if we get expanded ACA funding, everything's fine now.
Let me cut in here for a second, because I don't disagree with part of what you're saying. And I do think the tariffs really are the big bugaboo in the room when it comes to problems with how Trump is conducting himself compared to his predecessors. The reason Democrats aren't making it about the tariffs, and this is why I said you have to read between the lines a little bit on what they really want.
Because they want to use it for climate change? When President AOC is in power?
Maybe. No, but seriously, they have proven they are incapable of taking on the president on the kitchen table issues. ACA, it's something that even Democrats right now, they've turned on this compared to 12 years ago when it was passed into law. And I think ultimately this is an area where the Democrats can try and obstruct over the president's tariffs, something which, let's be honest, he has quite literally 0% chance of reversing himself on, again, short of a ruling from the Supreme Court, which I think it's kind of like a 50-50 toss-up at this point, but that's not the issue we're talking about. And they are choosing to go in on an issue where, again, they do not think the White House or Senate Republicans will play ball. They can fashion this in a discussion about health care, which, again, doesn't poll as well as inflation or prices or even immigration at this point in time. And they can still play out the same script, which is namely obstruct, force the White House to try and make a concession, which will, again, lessen Donald Trump in the eyes of voters down the line. And I think, again, the White House's own messaging is telling here. We heard a lot about Trump tacoing out, chickening out regarding the tariffs. Let's see if he'll chicken out on his threats to lay off, huge swaths of the federal government beyond the furlough, which, again, in case you weren't paying attention last week as this debate was heating up, OMB essentially said, we want every agency to enact those RAF, reduction in force plans you heard about from earlier in the spring. And a lot of these people won't be furloughed. They're going to be permanently fired. You think the president's going to do that at FEMA heading into hurricane season as there's a hurricane barreling in on the coast of Georgia
this is like
and
Russ
the Carolinas?
Vote's dream.
It
But
is.
Usual classic Trump, he doesn't realize the consigliaries below him are so much more extreme in any which direction. It's not all directionally the same, but
Correct.
the fact is Trump attitudinally is pretty moderate when push comes to shove, right? Which is a good instinct. But it also means I don't think he realizes himself what the shutdown practically means.
Well, on the other side of that coin, I think Democrats have now realized who they themselves are. And it's ineffective. So we're going to take the safe conservative lane, no pun intended, try and put the onus on the White House. Again, knowing that history will probably back us in this in the next election. Let's look forward for a second because, you're watching this on Tuesday. The deadline is Tuesday at midnight. Anything can change. But let's put our cards on the table. Do you think there will be a shutdown, or can the White House finagle some type of solution here in the final hours?
I think the shutdown goes through, and I don't think I don't think any party will make some major concession to reverse the shutdown. I think it will be both sides chickening out. I think Trump will say, no, I'm not going to overturn the only part of one big beautiful bill that really cut into deficit spending. Why would he? You'll have Mike Johnson correctly in his ear reminding him, do not restore Obamacare. If we can't mildly cut off subsidies to literal Obamacare, we can't do anything as a party. Like, the only thing that matters is that we're not Democrats, which frankly isn't saying much. I think Democrats have to do the shutdown because Chuck Schumer has, he wants to show, but he fights. And, I think there's some nominal concession made probably about those federal workers that are used as the bargaining chip, where then, Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries get to say, we saved all the federal workforce, even though nothing actually happened. And we're just going to be in hell where we just keep on passing CRs for 3 months until we die. Christian, we're going to be 90 years old doing this show, sitting right here, being like, this CR will fund the government for another, 48 hours, and that's why it must be passed.
Can't wait for the next several decades. That being said, it's time for us to move on. Up next, time for yays and nays.
Trump can't afford to make Lutnick's 100,000 H1-B visa an annual fee on big tech.
This is pretty easy. I'm going to say no. You're going to say yes, he can afford it.
I'm saying he can't afford it.
Oh, he can't afford it. Then
Yeah,
I will also
okay,
say
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
No affording
Not a
this
double
massive
negative.
change to the visa program. This is very complicated. Why don't you give our viewers a little bit of background about what exactly is happening here?
So there's sort of two policies. The top line is this $100,000 fee on H1-B visas. And this is complicated because Howard Lutnick is currently openly contradicting the White House. The official line from the White House is that this is a one-time fee on new H1-B visa applications. Lutnick has maintained and continues to maintain that this will be an annual fee, and initially said that this was on existing H1-B visa holders. So it led to this total disaster in, lots of big tech, where you had Amazon and Microsoft and JP Morgan Chase summoning the workers back to America. People, disproportionately Indian workers who were visiting home, going to a wedding, visiting parents, telling them, whatever it costs, get on a plane, get to America before the deadline. It was only 48 hours these workers had.
Yeah.
Then it comes out, it doesn't actually affect the workers who are currently have the H-1B visas. Lutnick wants it to be an annual thing because it's just poor politics, as we'll get into in a moment, but it's his way of marrying the anti-immigration, wing of the party, anti-legal immigration wing of the party, I should say, with the need to generate revenue for the government because we currently have a $36 trillion national debt. The second half of the visa reform is coming from DHS, where they are prioritizing and changing who gets more bids in the lottery for H-1B visas. Mind you, there are only 85,000 H-1B visas given in a year, something
Give or
like that.
take, yeah.
And these are the opposite of the illegals who came under Biden and immediately went on taxpayer-funded Medicaid in California and get, special SNAP benefit. Like, no. These are the workers that on net Manhattan Institute estimate contribute, I think it's $700,000 in their lifetimes to reducing the U.S. deficit because they give so much in taxes and they aren't on welfare. They aren't taking away from social safety net. They're just putting money back into the system. And that's not even including the economic growth. The DHS's change, and this is just going to get a little bit technical, but you'll see sort of in these graphs, the DHS's change is that you have a range of workers, levels 1 through 4. Level 1 workers are those who are considered entry level. Level 4 being the most experienced. And what DHS wants to do is give, if you're a level 4 worker, so the most experienced, you get 4 tickets in the metaphorical lottery for H-1B visas. If you're level 3, you get 3, level 2, 2 tickets, level 1, you only get 1 ticket. This is pretty regressive in terms of what the Trump administration wants to do, if you think about what they say they want to do, at least. What this means is that American graduates, or foreign graduates of American university that we've invested time, talent, and treasure into, they'll get 7% fewer visas. Outsourcing companies will get 8% more. And also, so these are from the Institute for Progress, which is like an abundance-aligned think tank. These are in real petitions filed in the last 4 years with the DHS for these H1-B visa applications. A level 1 candidate could be an entry-level ENT surgeon making $300,000, which is on the lower end of the scale for being an ENT surgeon. Maybe like a 60-year-old ENT surgeon could be bringing in over $1 million, but the entry level only $300,000. A level 4 candidate can include a landscape architect who's making $36,000 a year because they're earning at the high end of the scale. This obviously doesn't make a lot of sense for many reasons, but first among them is that the entire economy right now is AI and big tech.
Yeah.
I cannot even overstate how much this is the case. For starters, we have never in American history had this much household wealth currently invested in the stock market. It's about 30% of household wealth.
Staggering.
Americans have never been more exposed to the stock market and dependent on the growth, right? Because home prices are not a great thing to necessarily invest in. Cash, absolutely not. It's all equities. And what is driving equities right now? Big tech.
Yep.
On top of that, real GDP growth in the first half of the year, half of that was because of IT investment. And so if you're putting a tax on the inputs for big tech, Amazon is the #1 company that uses H1-B visas, you're effectively increasing, their prices for how they can operate. So if you get one bad quarter of earnings reports from Amazon, from JP Morgan Chase, from, the company, Microsoft, the companies that really use these H1-B visas, it's why Elon Musk was warning before the admin even started. You do not go after H1-B visas because that is all that's keeping the economy afloat right now.
Yeah.
It's everything else is a little way too soft, but you can overlook inflation creeping closer back to 3% and job creation going closer down to 0. As long as you get that, bonker stock market return.
Yeah.
The moment that collapses, not only does the general sentiment go down, but individual Americans are more exposed to that stock market than ever.
That was a brilliant summation of this problem, and I'm going to try and take it from a different angle, certainly not one based in economic or immigration theory. But this is the problem with the Trump administration. They have built such a big tent. It's such a huge coalition. They have trouble matching policies to try and please everyone. And it's exacerbated by the fact when the people crafting those policies, they might be smart, but they really have no idea how these systems actually operate, right? So let's take Howard Lutnick for an example. I'm sure Howard Lutnick has employed some H-1B visas in his financial career in the past, right? And he wants to say, oh, we actually want to funnel American workers into these positions. This is just one side of the argument. This is the immigration and workforce side of the argument. That's all good and fine, but the whole reason we have these H-1B visas is because we can't find the Americans to fill these positions in the first place, and they are critical to ensuring growth at these, high end of the spectrum companies that drive the market and drive tech innovation across the country. This is just not a good solution. On top of that, politically, we've heard a lot over the last 10 years about, Democrats just want, unchecked illegal immigration because those people are going to vote Democrat down the line, and even if they have anchor babies here or whatever, they'll be Democrats. The people that this will negatively impact the most, the immigrants who will be impacted the most, are the exact type of immigrants who go on to become Republican, right? This just makes no sense, and I think you sort of hit the nail on the head. Howard Lutnick hears anything about, how can we maximize incoming revenue without paying a damn about how this will actually play out in reality, either on the economic side or on the immigration side, and certainly not in the long-term political.
And if this is a tax,
right?
that means that the Laffer curve still applies. It means that if you, the same way that traditional Republicans always say, we want to cut income taxes because there is a certain tax point where people will just work fewer hours. The same applies to putting a tax on H1-B visas. There will be a limit to, how much Amazon wants to shell out to sponsor someone's H1-B visa.
Exactly. Nailed it.
Now it's time for us to fill in the blank.
Trump is trying to blank by sending federal police assets into Oregon.
This is pretty easy. I'd say Trump is trying to go back to the well, to use one of my favorite idioms. The president's poll numbers are, I don't want to say abysmal yet, because his overall approval rating is basically what it's been since 2017. And even on the economy, he's still flirting with 50-50. But he's certainly polling the absolute highest when it comes to addressing violent crime and law and order, right? You look at what's happened over the last several months. We had Donald Trump send in the National Guard to the District of Columbia, which actually worked out pretty well. He flirted with sending troops to Chicago. He directed the Pentagon to send National Guard troops to Memphis, Tennessee. And now he's moving on to Portland. And the natural question you have to ask is why? He doesn't love Portland. He's talked about it at least for the last 5 years, how it's like a hellhole city with the blue hairs running around. And shout out to Chaz, the autonomous zone of operation. And economically, it doesn't really, have a ton of weight. So what is he really trying to get out of this? He's trying to get cameras on the ground, having very aggressive protesters running the gambit up to rioters, engaging and clashing with law enforcement, because he can say, oh, look, all these liberal-run states and Democrat-run cities are hellholes. I'll say it again. And this is something he needs when you have places in California, or home state, where San Francisco appears to be turning the corner on moving away from
because they got rid of their Soros prosecutor and got a tough on crime normie dem mayor.
Exactly. I mean, do you think I'm right? Do you think he's trying to get anything out of this other than the optics, or is this like a strategic move?
No, I mean, I agree with you. I'm going to use a synonymous phrase. Trump is trying to go the defund the police left, trying to go the hard progressive far left. Because I do think the strategy is largely, again, the economy is not gangbusters the way it should be. It does not feel like we're growing at 3.8% annually. Just because that wage growth is positive, it's 0.8% since Trump started in office, but it's not the 3% wage growth he was talking about. Going back to the well, but specifically doing so by eliciting a dumb response out of Democrats. And this just goes back to the whole idea that the resistance is futile because they can't focus on things that are popular. Again, Trump has done plenty of things that small c conservatives and small l liberals should both be pretty mad about in terms of the power itself of the presidency when it comes to domestic policy. Instead, every time Trump talks about, I'm going to send in the National Guard, the argument is not about constitutionality. It is not about, you can send in federal law enforcement, but not federal troops. It is a stalwart defense of not only are Portland and Chicago with these insane violent crime rates, not only is it not a problem, actually it's good and you're bad for noticing. And I don't even think it's just the footage of, idiot Chaz protesters who will inevitably try to assault National Guard troops, which basically happens every single time you have these conflagrations. It's also just the fact that, Gallup, after Charlie Kirk's murder, said that 8% of people said that the biggest issue facing the country is crime or violence. That's the highest share since 2020. It's up from 3% in the poll before that. So you have still the overhang of the miasma of the horrible Charlie Kirk assassination. Lots of Democrats, unfortunately, not Democratic Party members, but lots of liberals, like even Jimmy Kimmel, who's kind of a mainstream figure, lying about it, Americans feeling gaslit, and then feeling gaslit again when Brandon Johnson says, Chicago's totally fine even though 58 people were shot over Labor Day weekend. And so it's a great way to distract from, Trump's rating on inflation specifically. According to Nate Silver's poll aggregation, he is 30 points underwater on inflation. And that is the issue that put him back in the White House.
Yeah.
On immigration, it's like 5%. And like on various polls that break down immigration and crime into separate components, like this latest Washington Post Ipsos poll, Trump is doing best on crime, better than anything. It's just a classic, Dem stepping on the rake issue where Trump is doing things that you could get Rand Paul and the libertarians, or even, the squishy security mom, suburban mom vote, and instead they go after they take the 20 on the 80-20 issues. We cannot deport Kilmar Abrego Garcia and other MS-13 accused members. We cannot crack down on violent criminals in cities that have had Democratic mayors for 100 years.
And I do think we should note, Trump announced this via Truth Social last week. As of Monday, he had not issued a directive to Pete Hegseth and the Pentagon to actually mobilize assets. But he has been sued already over this.
So it could just be, like he's just vibing. Like him announcing the Amelia Earhart files must be released.
Why not?
It's just a vibe.
Yeah.
We all have funny thoughts late at night when we're tweeting from bed or truthing from bed.
Anyway, that's all the time we've got for this week. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. And do not forget to let us know which one of us took home victory in this week's clash. For more of our great reporting, you can go to washingtonexaminer.com. I'm Christian Daytalk.
And I'm Tiana Lowe Desher.
And we'll see you next week.